This frozen mummy was found after 140 years. What scientists discovered next shocked the world. A 400-year-old boy's mummy, which had rested in silence for centuries, suddenly spoke again thanks to modern CT scanning technology. A child more than 2,000 years old was discovered bound tightly beneath a peat bog, carrying with them a mysterious death that scientists are still debating to this day. A mass grave containing thousands of human remains, along with frozen mummies emerging as glaciers melt, has uncovered chapters of history that once seemed buried forever. Yet perhaps the most astonishing fact is that many of these secrets, even after being examined with the most advanced technology available today, still have no definitive explanation. Hello everyone! Welcome back to Ancient History, where we explore the world's most fascinating archaeological mysteries, uncover the secrets of lost civilizations, and follow the footprints of people who lived hundreds, thousands, or even millions of years before us. My friends, archaeology is about far more than simply digging up ancient skeletons or dusty artifacts. Every discovery is like another piece of an enormous historical puzzle, helping us better understand how people once lived, their beliefs, their wars, their disasters, and the often tragic stories of their lives. On today's journey, we'll travel across several countries, from Austria, Germany, Denmark, Poland, and Russia to the United States, to explore discoveries that have left even the scientific community astonished. You'll encounter the naturally preserved mummy of a young noble boy from 400 years ago, a mysterious 2,000-year-old bog body whose death remains unexplained, an ancient woman whose hair has survived for more than 2 millennia, mass graves revealing the brutal realities of World War II, fossils of creatures that survived the catastrophe that wiped out the dinosaurs, and a remarkably preserved 500-year-old chamois mummy that recently emerged from the permanent ice of the Alps. We'll also take a closer look at John Torrington, a young sailor who was just 20 years old when he died on January 1, 1846, during the ill-fated Franklin Arctic expedition. 140 years later, his body was excavated from the frozen Arctic ground and found to be preserved in an almost pristine condition, providing scientists with invaluable clues about one of history's greatest exploration mysteries. Can modern technology fully uncover the secrets that time has kept hidden? Or are there still questions that even today's science cannot answer? Join Ancient History as we begin this extraordinary journey into the past. Who knows? One of the discoveries ahead may reveal a truth that could change the way we understand human history forever. Now, let's begin. Frozen for 140 years, the terrifying secret of the lost Franklin Arctic expedition. Imagine standing in the middle of a vast, snow-covered wilderness where temperatures plunge far below zero, where there are no trees, no signs of life, only icy winds sweeping endlessly across the frozen landscape. Then, beneath ground that has remained frozen for centuries, you unexpectedly discover human faces that look as though they are peacefully asleep. But the most terrifying part is that they have been lying there for more than 140 years, carrying with them the story of one of the greatest mysteries in the history of Arctic exploration. How do you think you would feel at that moment? Chilled to the bone? Completely astonished? Those were the very emotions archaeologists experienced when they uncovered the preserved bodies of the men from the Franklin expedition, a voyage that was once expected to make history but instead became one of the world's greatest unsolved mysteries. The story began in 1845 at the port of Greenhithe, England. Two of the most advanced ships of their time, HMS Erebus and HMS Terror, departed with 134 sailors under the command of the renowned explorer Sir John Franklin. Their mission was to discover the legendary Northwest Passage, a sea route through the Arctic that would connect the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. This was far more than an ordinary expedition. It represented the pride of the British Royal Navy and had been equipped with the most advanced technology available at the time. Both ships were reinforced with iron to withstand the crushing pressure of Arctic ice, and they carried an enormous supply of provisions intended to last for years. Among their stores were more than 32,000 pounds of canned meat, over 1,000 pounds of raisins, and hundreds of gallons of salted food. Everything appeared to be perfectly prepared for a successful voyage, but no one could have imagined that it would be the last time anyone would ever see them alive. After sailing through Baffin Bay in northeastern Canada in July 1845, the two ships vanished completely from history. There was no distress signal, no final message. No one knew exactly what had happened to the expedition. Over the following years, numerous search missions were launched, but every one of them failed. It was as though the frozen Arctic had swallowed both the ships and everyone aboard. It wasn't until 1850 that British and American search parties discovered the first clues on Beechey Island in Nunavut, Canada. There, they found 3 small graves dating back to 1846. However, it would take nearly 140 more years before the secrets hidden inside those graves were finally revealed. During the 1980s, Canadian anthropologist Owen Beattie and his research team excavated the graves on Beechey Island. What they found astonished the world. Beneath approximately 5 feet of permanently frozen ground, they uncovered the body of John Torrington, a young sailor who was only 20 years old when he died on January 1, 1846. Remarkably, after more than a century, his body had been preserved in almost perfect condition. His facial features remained intact, his hair was still present. Even his pale blue eyes appeared partially open, as though he had only recently passed away. Yet behind this extraordinary preservation lay a heartbreaking story. The autopsy revealed that John Torrington weighed only about 66 pounds, a clear sign of severe malnutrition. Researchers also discovered extremely high levels of lead in his body, most likely caused by contaminated canned food consumed during the expedition. But that was not the expedition's darkest secret. In the years that followed, researchers uncovered additional evidence suggesting that the last surviving crew members may have faced such horrific starvation that they were forced to resort to cannibalism in order to survive. Knife marks found on human bones discovered on King William Island, Canada, during the 1980s and 1990s strongly supported this theory. Scientists believe that in their final days, surrounded by crushing ice, starvation, and disease, the survivors did whatever they could to stay alive. But the story of the Franklin expedition does not end with its frozen mummies. More than 160 years after disappearing, the expedition's 2 legendary ships were finally found. In 2014, the wreck of HMS Erebus was discovered on the seafloor near King William Island, Canada, at a depth of approximately 36 feet. 2 years later, in 2016, archaeologists located HMS Terror about 40 miles away, resting nearly 89 feet beneath the surface. Perhaps the most astonishing discovery was the ship's incredible state of preservation. Despite spending nearly 2 centuries in the frigid Arctic waters, HMS Terror remained remarkably intact. Archaeologist Ryan Harris once remarked that, looking at the vessel, it was hard to believe it had been resting underwater for more than 170 years. Then, in 2019, Canadian researchers used a remotely operated underwater vehicle to enter the wreck of HMS Terror for the very first time. The footage revealed chairs, bottles, tools, and many personal belongings still resting exactly where they had been left, as if time itself had stopped the instant the ship sank beneath the icy sea. Even today, many questions remain unanswered. Why did the 2 ships end up in different locations? What caused HMS Terror to sink even though its hull appears to have suffered very little damage? And what truly happened during the final days of the remaining 129 crew members? Perhaps we will never know the complete truth. Yet the frozen faces of John Torrington and his fellow sailors remain as silent messages from the past. They remind us that behind every great voyage of discovery lies not only glory, but also stories of unimaginable loss, suffering, and mysteries that may never be fully solved. And it is those enduring mysteries that have made the Franklin expedition one of the most haunting stories ever recorded in the history of human exploration. What do you think? The 400-year-old noble boy's mummy, a virtual autopsy, reveals the heartbreaking truth buried for 4 centuries. My friends, what would you think if I told you that a child who died nearly 400 years ago has remained so remarkably preserved that modern science can now reconstruct the final chapter of his life? It sounds like something straight out of a science fiction movie, doesn't it? Yet that seemingly impossible scenario has become reality in the village of Helmensut, Upper Austria, where scientists successfully uncovered the secrets of a young boy's mummy using advanced CT scanning technology, also known as a virtual autopsy. What surprised researchers the most was that what they discovered was completely different from what they had originally expected. The story begins inside the crypt of the Starhemberg family, one of Austria's oldest and most powerful noble dynasties, located near Wildberg Castle in the village of Helmensott. The crypt serves as the final resting place for numerous counts and members of the aristocracy, all buried in elaborately decorated metal coffins. However, among these luxurious coffins, one stood out as a remarkable exception. It was a small wooden coffin with no inscription, no name, and no identifying marks of any kind. That unusual detail immediately caught the attention of archaeologists, and it proved to be just as extraordinary as they had suspected. When researchers opened the coffin for examination, they were astonished to discover the remarkably well-preserved mummy of a boy about 1 year old, whose body had survived in an incredible state after nearly 4 centuries. Because much of the soft tissue remained intact, researchers from Germany's Munich Bogenhausen laboratory performed a full-body CT scan along with radiocarbon dating. The results suggested that the child was most likely Richard Wilhelm, the firstborn son of a noble couple from the Starhemberg family, who died around 1625 or 1626. According to Dr. Andreas Nerlich, the study's lead author, the fact that the child was buried alone in a wooden coffin rather than in the metal coffins used for other family members may reflect a special burial tradition reserved for the firstborn son of an aristocratic family. That may also explain why his remains were preserved so carefully that scientists today are still able to study the smallest details inside his body. Even more fascinating, further analyses painted a surprisingly detailed picture of the little boy's life nearly 400 years ago. By examining his teeth, measuring the length of his bones, and analyzing his physical development, researchers determined that he died at approximately 12 to 18 months of age. He had dark hair and a noticeably chubby build. In fact, he appeared to have been overweight compared to other children his age. This indicated that he had been exceptionally well nourished throughout his short life, exactly as one would expect for a child born into a wealthy noble family. But then the virtual autopsy revealed a heartbreaking truth that forced the research team to rethink all of their original assumptions. The CT images showed significant deformities in the boy's ribs, classic signs of metabolic bone disease caused by vitamin D deficiency, commonly known as severe rickets. In addition, both lungs displayed characteristic damage associated with pneumonia. At this point, many people might wonder how a child who had plenty of food and grew up surrounded by luxury could develop a disease more commonly associated with malnutrition. The answer was what truly surprised historians. According to the research team, the problem wasn't his diet. It was the lifestyle of Europe's aristocracy during the 17th century. At that time, extremely pale skin was considered a symbol of wealth, social status, and nobility. Affluent families often kept young children indoors as much as possible to preserve their fair complexion and protect them from direct sunlight. As a result, the boy's body was unable to produce enough vitamin D naturally, causing his bones to develop abnormally despite being fed the finest foods available. In the end, scientists concluded that the child ultimately died of pneumonia, while his long-term vitamin D deficiency and underlying bone disease had gradually weakened his overall health. It is a tragedy that seems almost impossible to believe. A heartbreaking story unfolding within one of the wealthiest noble families in Austria. Isn't that incredibly sad? Perhaps the most thought-provoking aspect of this discovery is not the remarkable preservation of the mummy or the wealth of the Starhemberg family. Rather, it is the fact that after just a single CT scan, modern science was able to reconstruct nearly the entire final chapter of the life of a child who had rested in peace for almost 400 years. The 2,000-year-old Bog Boy Mummy, uncovering a chilling ancient tragedy. Did you know that throughout human history, archaeologists have uncovered countless mummies that have left the scientific world in awe? Yet very few discoveries are as haunting and thought-provoking as the mummy of Khausen Boy, a child who was only about 7 years old when he met a mysterious death more than 2,000 years ago. Even more disturbing, his body was not buried according to ordinary funeral customs. Instead, he was tightly bound, stabbed multiple times, and placed in a peat bog. So what really happened to this young boy? Was he the victim of a brutal murder, or was he sacrificed as part of an ancient religious ritual? Let's follow the evidence uncovered by modern science and see what answers it may hold. The story began on July 3, 1922, at Moor in Lower Saxony, northwestern Germany. While harvesting peat as usual, a worker named Rogamon suddenly noticed part of a human leg bone, along with pieces of preserved skin, emerging from the peat at a depth of about 4 feet below the surface. At first, he assumed the remains belonged to an animal that had been buried long ago. But as he continued digging, the outline of a human body gradually emerged. Shocked by the discovery, he immediately notified the local museum. The very next day, archaeologists from the State Museum of Natural History and Prehistory in Oldenburg arrived to begin a careful excavation. Because the body began drying out rapidly once exposed to the air, the entire recovery had to be carried out quickly and with extreme care. Even so, both hands were damaged while the body was being removed from the tightly compressed peat. Afterward, the mummy was transported by wheelbarrow to the museum, attracting the curiosity of many local residents. At the time, no one realized that beneath the cloth covering the wheelbarrow rested the body of a child who had lain undisturbed beneath the bog for more than 2,000 years. Only after many years of research were scientists finally able to determine the mummy's age using pollen analysis, radiocarbon dating, and geochemical isotope analysis. The results showed that the boy had lived sometime between the 4th century BC and the 1st century BC during the Iron Age, and was almost certainly raised in the region surrounding Moor. Although more than 2 millennia had passed, his body retained an astonishing number of details. The bog's unique environment, with extremely low oxygen levels, cold temperatures, and acidic water produced by sphagnum moss, dramatically slowed decomposition, leaving much of his skin remarkably well preserved. His hair had turned reddish-brown because of chemical reactions within the bog, although researchers determined that its original color had been dark blonde. However, most of the soft tissue, including muscles and body fat, had decomposed, while the bones had been heavily decalcified. As a result, his entire body had been compressed until it was only a few centimeters thick. Examinations of his teeth and bones revealed that he was approximately 7.5 years old and stood between 3 feet 11 inches and 4 feet 5 inches tall while alive. But what attracted the greatest attention from researchers was his overall health. X-rays showed that his right hip joint had been severely deformed by a chronic infection that had healed before his death. This condition would likely have made walking extremely difficult and may even have required assistance with everyday activities. Researchers also found Harris lines in his shin bone, evidence that his growth had repeatedly been interrupted during childhood because of illness or malnutrition. Scientists made another remarkable discovery by analyzing the contents that remained in his digestive system. His final meal consisted of apples and the seeds of several plants commonly found in wetland environments. These findings provide valuable clues about the diet and surroundings of Iron Age communities living in northwestern Germany. Yet the greatest mystery remains the cause of his death. During their examination of the neck, forensic experts discovered that the boy had been stabbed 3 times, with each wound penetrating approximately 1¼ to 1½ inches deep. There was also another wound on his left arm. According to researchers, this injury was most likely inflicted while he was raising his arm in an attempt to defend himself from his attacker. More recent studies suggest that the weapon may have been a dagger with a blade about 1½ inches long. Even more disturbing, evidence showed that before being placed into the bog, the boy had been bound tightly. His arms were tied behind his back with thick woolen strips. Another cord had been wrapped around his neck, threaded between his legs, and tied back again. His legs were wrapped in a calfskin cloak, similar to garments discovered on several other bog bodies found throughout northern Europe. The knots were all tied after the stab wounds had already been inflicted, proving that binding the boy was a deliberate act carried out before his body was lowered into the bog. So why did a disabled child suffer such a tragic fate? To this day, anthropologists still cannot provide a definitive answer. However, one theory supported by many researchers suggests that in certain Iron Age communities, people with severe disabilities or chronic illnesses were sometimes believed to have fallen out of favor with the gods and may have been chosen as human sacrifices in religious ceremonies. This theory is strengthened by the discovery of several other European bog bodies, such as the Eyed Girl, which also display signs of injuries and physical abnormalities. Even today, the remains of Boy are preserved in a special conservation solution for ongoing scientific research and are not displayed to the public. The Elling woman's mummy. Her hair remained intact for over 2,200 years, but the leather cord around her neck revealed a haunting death. The story began in 1938 at Bjelskovdal Bog, located west of the city of Silkeborg on Denmark's Jutland Peninsula. While cutting peat as part of his usual work, a local farmer named Jens Zachariasen unexpectedly noticed what appeared to be parts of a human body emerging from beneath the muddy peat. At first, he assumed it was simply the remains of an animal that had drowned long ago, but as he dug deeper, the unmistakable outline of a human body gradually came into view. Realizing that he might have uncovered something significant, he immediately contacted the National Museum of Denmark, and archaeologists soon arrived to begin a careful excavation. The body was found approximately 3.5 feet beneath the surface of the bog. Because of the oxygen-poor environment, low temperatures, and the natural acids produced by sphagnum moss, the woman's body had been naturally mummified. When it was lifted from the peat, the soft tissues were still remarkably flexible. The skin had turned a dark brown color resembling tanned leather, and many physical details remained astonishingly well preserved. But the most extraordinary feature of all was her hair. Researchers measured it at approximately 35 inches long, an exceptional length for an ancient mummy. Part of her hair had been neatly braided, while the rest had been carefully tied into a bun at the back of her head. Even after lying beneath the peat for more than 2,000 years, the hairstyle had remained almost completely unchanged. Experts at the Silkeborg Museum even recreated the hairstyle for visitors, allowing people to visualize what the woman likely looked like during her lifetime. Besides her remarkable hair, the body was found wearing a short sheepskin cape. Her legs were wrapped in another piece of animal hide, and around her neck was still a thin leather cord. What appeared to be an ordinary detail would later become the most important piece of evidence in determining the cause of her death. Unfortunately, however, archaeologists made a significant mistake for several decades. When the body was first discovered in 1938, experts believed the remains belonged to a man. This interpretation was even included by the renowned archaeologist P.V. Glubb in his book The Bog People, published in 1965. It wasn't until nearly 40 years later, when modern X-ray technology was used during examinations at the Silkeborg Museum in 1976 and 1978, that the truth finally came to light. The structure of the pelvis clearly showed that the remains belonged to a woman, approximately 25 years old at the time of her death. From that point forward, the name Elling woman became the official designation used in scientific literature. The examinations also revealed that the acidic bog environment had dissolved much of the mineral content in her bones, leading some early researchers to mistakenly believe she had suffered from osteoporosis. Later analyses confirmed that this was simply the result of thousands of years submerged in acidic peat water. Even so, enough of her skeletal structure remained intact for scientists to determine both her age and her sex. Next, radiocarbon dating established that the woman had lived around 210 BC with a margin of error of approximately 70 years. That means she died during the pre-Roman Iron Age, more than 2,200 years ago. This dating also matched the other artifacts discovered with the body, including the sheepskin cape, leather bindings, and her distinctive hairstyle. Even more remarkable, just 12 years later, in 1950, archaeologists discovered another famous bog body, the Toland man, only about 200 feet from where the Elling woman had been found. Both bodies dated to roughly the same period and both showed evidence of highly unusual deaths. This has led many experts to believe that the area once served as a site for special rituals during the Iron Age. Yet the most haunting clue remains the leather cord around her neck. A distinct groove was still visible on the mummy's neck, perfectly matching the leather cord recovered during the excavation. After repeated forensic examinations, experts concluded that the woman most likely died by hanging or strangulation. Coincidentally, this is also the officially accepted cause of death for the nearby Toland man. Even today, archaeologists cannot say with certainty whether she was the victim of an execution, a violent crime, or a religious sacrifice offered to Iron Age deities. More than 25 victims of Nazi Germany discovered, nearly 80 years later in a mass grave, hidden deep within a Polish forest. Did you know that archaeology can be incredibly surprising? Not every archaeological discovery takes us back thousands of years. Sometimes, all it takes is digging beneath the soil of what appears to be a peaceful forest to uncover painful memories from a chapter of history the world never wants to repeat. Some graves have no headstones, no names, and for decades, no one even knows they exist. But the truth, no matter how deeply it is buried, will eventually come to light. That is exactly what happened in Warsaw, the capital of Poland. A discovery that serves as a haunting reminder of the past. The discovery was announced after Poland's Institute of National Remembrance (IPN) conducted an investigation in a forest on the northern outskirts of Warsaw, near the communities of Choszczówka and Legionowo. What makes the story remarkable is that it did not begin with sophisticated technology or a large-scale archaeological survey. Instead, it began with the testimony of an elderly eyewitness. The man recalled that when he was about 7 or 8 years old, during World War II, he personally witnessed Nazi German soldiers escorting groups of prisoners deep into that forest. None of them ever came back. That memory stayed with him for nearly 8 decades. When he finally shared his story with historians, no one could be certain whether memories from so long ago would still be accurate. Yet that testimony, something that many might have dismissed as nothing more than an old memory, became the starting point of an extraordinary investigation. Experts from the Institute of National Remembrance quickly compared his account with historical documents, wartime military maps, and archival records. After several days of field surveys, they identified a likely location and began excavating. Within the very first days, the first signs began to emerge. As layers of soil were carefully removed, one human skeleton after another appeared beneath the ground, lying close together. Tomasz Traska, a representative of the investigative team, said the excavation left everyone present speechless. Beneath the forest floor lay the remains of at least 25 people, including men, women, and children. The victims had been buried together in a single large pit without coffins or any evidence of a proper burial. One detail immediately caught the attention of archaeologists. Most of the skeletons were positioned almost in straight rows, suggesting that the victims had likely been forced to lie down before being executed by firing squad. Scattered around the grave, investigators also recovered personal belongings, including buttons, belt buckles, shoes, and fragments of clothing. Although time had erased nearly every other trace, these artifacts silently testified that beneath this soil once lay real people. People who had families, hopes, and ordinary lives before everything was taken from them by war. After comparing the discovery with records preserved by the Central Archives of Modern Records of Poland, historians found strong evidence linking the grave to an execution documented in 1943. Secret reports written by the Polish resistance at the time describe how, on July 3, 1943, 4 German military trucks transported approximately 100 prisoners, including women, to the forest between Choszczówka and Legionowo. According to eyewitness accounts preserved in those records, the prisoners were ordered to dig large pits themselves. Once the work was finished, Nazi German soldiers immediately shot them at the edge of the graves they had just dug, causing them to fall directly into the pits. That brief but chilling report has become one of the most important pieces of evidence explaining the existence of the newly discovered mass grave. However, researchers believe that the 25 sets of human remains recovered so far represent only the first phase of the excavation. They do not rule out the possibility that many more victims remain buried beneath the forest, since historical records indicate that roughly 100 people were brought to the site on that same day. The work ahead will be far from easy. Scientists plan to conduct DNA analysis, anthropological studies, and comparisons with historical records in an effort to identify each victim. Although the process could take many years, every name that is recovered may finally bring closure to a family that has been waiting for generations. According to historians, nearly 6 million Polish citizens lost their lives during World War II. More than 90% of them were civilians, people who never fought on the battlefield but nevertheless became victims of massacres, persecution, and the systematic policies of extermination carried out by Nazi Germany after invading Poland in 1939. That is an unimaginable number, isn't it? Perhaps what makes this discovery so significant is not simply the number of human remains that were uncovered, but the way history has been pieced back together through fragments of memory that were nearly lost forever. Had that elderly witness never shared what he saw as a young boy? Had historians not patiently verified every detail, those unnamed victims might have remained beneath that forest forever, forgotten by the world. Sometimes archaeology is about much more than uncovering ancient civilizations or buried treasures. It is also about restoring identities to those who were lost, restoring truth to history, and reminding all of us of the terrible price of war. Speaking honestly, in my short lifetime, I have never liked war, not even a little. I believe in peace. What about you? Do you feel the same way? Share your thoughts in the comments below. 1,837 skeletons discovered beneath Stalingrad, revealing the brutality of the bloodiest battle of World War II. My friends, throughout human history, there have been battlefields remembered not only for victory or defeat, but for the unimaginable scale of human loss. One of the most devastating is the Battle of Stalingrad, widely regarded as one of the bloodiest battles in military history. Millions of people were drawn into the chaos of the fighting, and countless lives were lost. Many of those who died simply disappeared, leaving behind no marked graves. Yet more than 75 years after the battle ended, the ground beneath the city of Volgograd, Russia, formerly known as Stalingrad, unexpectedly revealed one of its darkest secrets. The story began when construction workers were digging a trench to install a new water pipeline in the Angarsky district of Volgograd. At first, they assumed they had simply encountered an unusual layer of soil. But when the first human bones appeared, work immediately came to a halt, and local authorities were notified. Soon afterward, archaeologists, Russian officials, and their German counterparts joined forces to investigate the site. A large-scale excavation was launched with extraordinary care because everyone understood that the discovery could be connected to one of the most devastating battles the world has ever witnessed. As archaeologists slowly removed layer after layer of earth, the truth gradually emerged. Hidden beneath the ground was an enormous mass grave containing the remains of thousands of people. Initially, authorities estimated that the site held approximately 800 skeletons. The final count, however, stunned everyone involved. In total, 1,837 German soldiers' skeletons were recovered. The mass grave measured approximately 430 feet long, 23 feet wide, and nearly 6.5 feet deep. In addition to human remains, archaeologists also discovered horse bones buried within the same grave. This suggests that during the final stages of the battle, conditions had become so catastrophic that burying the dead quickly was considered essential to prevent the spread of disease. To understand why such a massive grave exists in Volgograd, we need to travel back to 1942, when Nazi Germany launched its offensive against the city of Stalingrad in an effort to seize this strategically important location on the banks of the Volga River. At first, German forces pushed deep into the city, led by the powerful German Sixth Army, one of the Wehrmacht's most elite military formations. However, they were eventually surrounded by Soviet forces during months of brutal fighting in the depths of winter. Every street, every building, even every single room became a battlefield. The Battle of Stalingrad was more than a military confrontation between two armies. It became a desperate struggle for survival under the harshest imaginable conditions. Freezing temperatures, severe food shortages, disease, and relentless combat caused casualties to mount day after day. According to historians, the total number of people killed throughout the battle reached approximately 1.9 million, including soldiers from both sides as well as civilians. For the German Sixth Army, the battle became an irreversible catastrophe. The force initially numbered more than 240,000 soldiers. After being encircled and eventually surrendering in early 1943, only about 5,000 ultimately returned to Germany after spending years in captivity. Approximately 147,000 German soldiers were killed, while more than 91,000 others were taken prisoner. Those staggering figures help explain why the discovery of such a massive burial site in Volgograd was not entirely unexpected. During the most desperate moments of the war, mass burials were often the only practical way to deal with the overwhelming number of casualties in such a short period of time. One particularly important detail helped researchers identify many of the remains. Numerous German soldiers were still wearing their metal identification tags, commonly known as dog tags. These small objects became invaluable clues, allowing investigators to trace individual soldiers and, whenever possible, contact surviving family members in Germany. For many relatives, finally learning what happened to a missing father, grandfather, or uncle after decades of uncertainty carries enormous emotional significance. Even if it cannot erase the pain, it provides long-awaited answers. The discovery has also sparked debate within the local community. Some Soviet veterans who survived the war believe that German soldiers should not be commemorated on land that suffered so terribly under the Nazi invasion. For them, the memories of that invasion remain painful wounds that have never fully healed. Archaeologists and historians, however, see the discovery from a different perspective. To them, the remains are not simply soldiers from one side. They are human beings who once lived ordinary lives, had families, and had futures before they were swept into one of history's most devastating wars. Today, the site of the mass grave in Volgograd continues to be an important location for historical research. The remains are carefully recovered and analyzed, and if no surviving relatives can be identified, they are reburied with appropriate military honors. Many believe this is a deeply humane way to honor the dead, regardless of which side they fought for, while ensuring that history is neither forgotten nor repeated. The 66-million-year-old monster fossil that survived the mass extinction of the dinosaurs. When people think about the greatest catastrophe in Earth's history, most immediately picture the moment the dinosaurs disappeared from our planet. About 66 million years ago, a massive asteroid slammed into what is now the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico, creating the catastrophic Chicxulub impact. The collision triggered dramatic global climate change and wiped out roughly 75% of all species on Earth. The giant creatures that had once dominated the planet, from the dinosaurs that ruled the land to enormous marine reptiles such as mosasaurs and ichthyosaurs, almost completely vanished. Yet amid all that destruction, one seemingly unremarkable creature quietly survived the catastrophe and continued living for thousands of years afterward. That creature was Atractosteus grandi, an ancient fish with a bizarre appearance that scientists have described as a true prehistoric monster of the waterways. The fossil of this remarkable animal was discovered in the lowest section of the Fort Union Formation in Bowman County, North Dakota, United States. The specimen was preserved inside a fragile layer of light brown mudstone resting above a 3-inch thick layer of lignite coal, evidence that it once lived in an ancient freshwater environment. The fossil was analyzed by a research team led by paleontologist Chase Doran Brownstein of Yale University, together with Tyler Lyson of the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. Their study identified the specimen as a member of the GAR lineage of ray-finned fishes, an ancient family known as Lepisostidae, which first appeared during the late Jurassic period, approximately 150 million years ago. What makes this discovery truly extraordinary is the fossil's age. Multiple dating methods indicate that the specimen is about 66 million years old, placing it almost exactly at the time of the Chicxulub asteroid impact. Even more astonishing, researchers concluded that this fish survived the mass extinction event for approximately 1,500 to 2,500 years afterward. In other words, while the last dinosaurs disappeared from the Earth and giant marine reptiles vanished forever, this remarkable creature was still swimming through the rivers and freshwater lakes of ancient North America. Scientists report that the fossil includes numerous exceptionally preserved features, including a nearly complete skull, an articulated lower jaw, vertebrae, ribs, and its distinctive scales. Because of this remarkable level of preservation, researchers have gained a much clearer understanding of the ecosystems that existed immediately after the greatest biological crisis in Earth's history. But perhaps the biggest question is this: why was this creature able to survive when so many others disappeared? According to the researchers, the answer lies in its habitat. Unlike large land animals that depended on complex forest ecosystems and abundant food supplies, smaller freshwater species were generally better able to withstand sudden environmental changes. After the asteroid struck, enormous amounts of dust and toxic gases filled the atmosphere, dramatically reducing sunlight, altering global temperatures, and causing food chains on land to collapse. Large animals that required vast amounts of food quickly faced starvation. Freshwater ecosystems, however, offered some species places where they could find shelter and continue to survive despite the catastrophic conditions. The authors of the study, published in the scientific journal Biology Letters, concluded that large land-dwelling vertebrates suffered the greatest impacts from the extinction event, while smaller animals living in freshwater habitats were partially protected from its most severe effects. The discovery of Atractosteus grandi is therefore much more than simply the discovery of another ancient fossil. It provides compelling evidence that life did not disappear entirely after one of Earth's greatest extinction events. 500-year-old chamois mummy emerges from an Alpine glacier. The story began at Gepachferner Glacier, located in the Tyrol region of western Austria near the Italian border. It is one of the largest glaciers in the region, covered by snow and ice throughout the year. However, in recent years, the glacier has been melting at an unprecedented rate, revealing objects that no one believed could have survived for centuries. During the summer of 2024, while inspecting a weather monitoring station at an elevation of more than 11,000 feet, researcher Martin Stocker-Waldhuber suddenly noticed two small horns protruding from the melting ice. At first, he assumed they belonged to an animal that had died only recently. But after taking a closer look, he realized the remains could belong to an ancient animal that had been trapped inside the glacier for centuries. The discovery was quickly reported to Andrea Fischer, a glaciologist at the Institute of Interdisciplinary Mountain Research in Innsbruck, Austria. At that time, however, only a small portion of the animal was exposed, and winter was approaching rapidly. Attempting to excavate it immediately carried a high risk of damaging the specimen. As a result, the research team decided to wait nearly another year, hoping that the following summer would melt enough ice to allow the mummy to be recovered safely. Their patience paid off. When the next summer arrived, a significant amount of ice had melted from Gepachferner Glacier. This was the opportunity the scientists had been waiting for. They immediately gathered their specialized equipment and climbed to the site before worsening weather conditions could make recovery impossible. Working at elevations above 11,000 feet is never easy. According to Andrea Fischer, weather conditions in the Alps can change within minutes. Strong winds, sudden snowfall, and rapidly dropping temperatures often make helicopter operations far too dangerous. Even more importantly, if the animal remained exposed on the glacier for too long, it could be damaged by bearded vultures or other scavenging animals before researchers could reach it. For that reason, the team had to move quickly. Using chainsaws, ice axes, and other specialized equipment, they carefully cut away the layers of ice surrounding the animal. After many hours of work, they successfully recovered the entire specimen. A closer examination revealed that it was a young female chamois, standing less than 2 feet tall and estimated to have died at around 2 years of age. What astonished researchers most was that despite having remained frozen for approximately 500 years, most of the body was exceptionally well preserved. Both horns were still attached to the head. Large portions of the skin remained intact, especially along the back and rib cage. Tufts of chestnut-brown fur still covered all 4 hooved legs, making the animal appear as though it had died only recently. Although the skin on the head had deteriorated, causing one horn to separate from the skull and leaving one eye socket exposed, the specimen is still considered one of the best-preserved naturally mummified animals ever discovered in the Alps. After the recovery, the mummy was carefully wrapped in specialized protective plastic to slow decomposition once exposed to the air. It was then transported to the Ferdinandium Research Center at the Tyrolean State Museum in Innsbruck, Austria, where it is being preserved in a freezer at -4 degrees Fahrenheit. Scientists now plan to perform CT scans and analyze the animal's digestive tract and remaining soft tissues to learn more about its diet, overall health, and the cause of its death. They also intend to compare the specimen with another approximately 400-year-old chamois mummy discovered in the Alps in 2020. By studying these two exceptionally rare specimens, researchers hope to gain a better understanding of how chamois lived under ancient climate conditions and why they inhabited such harsh, icy mountain environments. According to Andrea Fischer, the summer of 2024 saw a record-breaking glacier melt across the eastern Alps. In just a single season, the surface of several glaciers lost as much as 23 feet of ice, far exceeding anything previously recorded. Meanwhile, Albert Zink, director of the Institute for Mummy Studies at URAC Research in Bolzano, Italy, believes that if global warming continues at its current pace, scientists are likely to uncover many more human remains, animal mummies, and ancient artifacts that have been buried beneath glaciers for hundreds or even thousands of years. My friends, every mummy, every fossil, and every ancient grave we've explored today is more than just a relic of the past. Each one is a piece of the puzzle that helps us better understand history and ultimately, ourselves. Although science has solved many mysteries, countless questions are still waiting to be answered beneath the earth, locked inside ancient glaciers or hidden among the ruins of long-lost civilizations. So, which discovery did you find the most mysterious? Let us know in the comments below. And if you enjoy journeys of discovery like this one, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Ancient History, and turn on notifications so you never miss the fascinating mysteries we'll uncover in future videos. Thanks so much for watching, and until next time, take care.